In this video, we're going to look at the Game Boy Raspberry Pi clones. The original Game Boy was codenamed the DMG or Dot Matrix game, which was the hardware they used for the display, and you should see it written on the screen protector. It's also commonly used to describe the colour variant of the original Game Boy. So I feel currently Raspberry Pi consoles are less popular these days, mainly because there are such an influx of better options for retro portable gaming at an affordable price and perform pretty well. But what I have here are 4 consoles that have obviously taken inspiration, if not a copy, of the original Game Boy design. Also, just a note, with all these devices, they're all utilising RetroPie, so I will not be going over the interfaces as it's just emulation station running in the background. First up, we have the RetroFlag G-Pi case. This was released back in 2019 and utilises the Raspberry Pi 0W. What it did offer was it being the first commercial-led look at what a Raspberry Pi Game Boy would look and function like. Also, a quick mention about RetroFlag, they're also responsible for making the NES and SNES case, which I absolutely love. And also, you may have noticed that I have the Game Boy logos and game cartridge stickers instead of the default stickers. I'll link the seller in the description below, but it's again Sakura modding. So if we compare it to an original Game Boy, the RetroFlag has tried to keep the design pretty faithful to its counterpart. It's definitely smaller in size, it has 4 face buttons instead of 2, it has a much larger screen at 2.8 inches with a resolution of 320 by 240. There's a brightness wheel, and on the other side it has a volume wheel. On the back, I absolutely love this solution. It has trigger buttons hidden as part of the case. Although it's a little hard to press when gaming, it uses 3 AA batteries to power the whole thing, but you could also use a barrel connector to the mains as well. For the Raspberry Pi, this again is a great idea to encase it inside a sort of cartridge slot. The Pi Zero is connected by these pogo pins and the contacts connects to the main board to operate everything. When I received and started using the device, it just lacked the performance, which really was underwhelming. Checking the RetroFlag scene, I stumbled on a replacement for the Pi Zero, and you can replace it with a Raspberry Pi CM3 Plus, so it's pretty much the same performance of a Raspberry Pi 3. The only issue is that it's pretty big in size and sticks out a fair amount, but if you're not bothered by this definitely adds more to performance. So moving along in 2022, we have the follow-up to the G-Pi case, aptly named the G-Pi Case 2. This offered a lot more improvements and upgrades compared to its predecessor, and starting at an $80 price point, it's not too bad in terms of what you're getting. But considering you would need to buy an SD card and a Raspberry Pi, this will bump up the total price. On the front, they've added a dedicated menu and turbo button. It now has a rechargeable battery instead of using 2 AA batteries, and at the bottom, it has a Type-C port for charging. If we open the top, the Raspberry Pi now sits inside of the console instead of a separate case. It uses the Raspberry Pi CM4, and a little caution, do not use the eMMC with internal storage, as it has its own SD storage and the device cannot access the storage from the CM4. Adding the CM4 was very fiddly, as you would need to connect the CM4 to the main board. Like a piece of Lego, I found it difficult to align the connectors. The screen also got an upgrade, measuring at 3 inches and a resolution of 640 by 480. What also comes with the G-Pi Case 2 is a pretty cool dock that offers HDMI output and 2 full-sized USBs, so this would be great to play on a big screen like a Nintendo Switch. Performance-wise, this device is able to play Dreamcast and PS1 games with ease, and also some PSP games. Next, we have the experimental Pi's Piboy DM. It uses a full-size Raspberry Pi 4, so it will not be compromised in terms of ports and performance. Size-wise, it's pretty much the same as an original Game Boy. It's $139, which means it's much more expensive compared to the G-Pi case. In terms of controls, it has 6 face buttons to compensate for the shoulder buttons, and a single analog stick for PSP titles. What I don't like about the Piboy's design is the font they use for start, select and A, B, C, X, Y, Z. It's a lot bolder and just doesn't look like the original Game Boy's font, but this is a minor gripe. On the sides, we have access to the SD card, and on the other side, we have a brightness wheel. On the bottom, we have a volume wheel. Personally, I would have preferred it to be on the side, but again, it's nothing you cannot get used to. And we have a headphone jack and a micro USB for charging. On the back, we have a massive 4500 mAh battery, and like the Pi case, we have those hidden L and R buttons. The screen is a 3.5-inch display with a resolution of 640 by 480. The installation was pretty easy. Just pop off the back housing and the Pi 4 connects to the GPIO header. It also has a fan for cooling the Raspberry Pi, which is great if you're planning on playing more demanding games. Performance is decent and can comfortably play Dreamcast and some PSP games really well. And lastly, we have the Piboy XRS. It's also made by Experimental Pi, but this is a horizontal variant akin to a Game Boy Advance, but still having the DMG's aesthetics. At a $149 price point, this is a much more expensive option. The XRS has similar features to the Piboy DMG, such as the 3.5-inch display, and it also uses the Raspberry Pi 4. The face buttons are now reduced to 4, but now has a shoulder and trigger buttons, which we're more accustomed to. It also has 2 analog sticks instead of the one, and now has a menu button which acts as both the power button and a menu button to control the brightness and volume. One major upgrade is the use of Type-C connector instead of a micro USB. So if you have a strong opinion about the connectors as I do, this might be something to consider. It also has a battery upgrade, with it now being two 2800 mAh batteries totaling 5600 mAh. Performance wise, it's pretty much identical to the Piboy DMG, but as I say, it does have an additional analog stick, so you do have more options in terms of games. So my closing thoughts about the Raspberry Pi DMG clones is, unless you really like the aesthetics of the original Game Boy and it being able to utilize a Raspberry Pi, maybe you have a Raspberry Pi laying around and you want to use it for something, these devices may be a good option. I personally think these are a pretty niche product and would only appeal to enthusiasts like myself. But if I were to solely compare these 4 products, they unfortunately do have their own flaws, or just small features that are either missing or are in the other units. For example, I would just stay away from the Pi Case 1, as it's pretty underpowered, and to be honest, I'm not sure whether they've discontinued it or not. The Pi Case 2 is great, but as I say, I did find it a little difficult to install the Raspberry Pi, and also does not have an analog stick, so some games are limited, especially PSP titles. The Piboy DMG is great, but I would rather they had incorporated shoulder buttons instead of extending the face buttons. I found it very confusing at times to find where the shoulder buttons were. The volume wheel was situated at the bottom, which I prefer to be on the side, and also they used a micro USB instead of a Type-C connector. Installation wasn't too bad, but there were some cables you had to be careful with. The Piboy XRS I think was almost perfect, but the biggest thing was that it's a horizontal device instead of a vertical one, and it's supposed to be a Game Boy clone. This really doesn't meet that requirement, but it does have everything else going for it. It has a proper shoulder and trigger buttons, it has a Type-C connector. I would say it was the easiest to install and has all the features I wanted, apart from not being vertical like a Game Boy. But if you don't want to faff around setting up and customizing your device, these are definitely not for you. I think the biggest issue is the price point. If you factor in that you will need to purchase a Raspberry Pi and an SD card, you're looking at way over $100 for the cheapest variant. If we look at something similar, like the Miu Mini Plus or the RG35XX, those are around the $60 to $70 mark, and you wouldn't need to buy anything extra. But don't get me wrong, there's a space for these to exist, but I don't think they're going to appeal to the big market. Thanks again for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!